Welcome to Be Customer Led, where we'll explore how leading experts in customer and employee experience are navigating organizations through their own journey to be customer led, and the actions and behaviors employees and businesses exhibit to get there. And now your host, Marbu Brown.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to a very special episode of Be Customer Led. Today, we have the privilege of hosting two CEOs with us to have a conversation about how AI is making a difference in supporting customers, and especially in some of the most complex businesses like regulated industries. We have Steve Hind, CEO and co-founder at Lorikeet, an AI-native customer operations platform that builds concierge customer support experiences for its customers, and Tim Doyle, founder and CEO at Eucalyptus, a telehealth platform that runs a trusted group of digital healthcare clinics. Welcome to the program, Steve and Tim.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Absolutely. I'm excited about this program. I gave a little bit of an intro there, but it's much better when the folks get to hear directly from the source, and we want them to know a bit about the backstory of our guests. So, Steve and Tim, would each of you please take a few minutes to share your journey, how you became the CEO of your respective companies?
I think Tim should lead off because the history of Lorikeet is very intertwined with Eucalyptus, and so getting the Eucalyptus story from Tim first, I think, will make the most sense.
Yeah, for sure. So we are a telehealth platform, as you said in the introduction. I think the most interesting thing about us is we operate in probably a wider variety of markets than I think any other telehealth company at scale in the world. So we have patients in Australia, in Japan, in Canada, in Germany. I think that's it for now. But we've got a very rapidly expanding footprint, and that creates a whole lot of complexity around how you deliver consults, how you deliver medications, how you deliver prescriptions. And so delivering that to kind of well over 1 million patients now has been a real complex challenge over a long time. And then I think as we've integrated AI into that more and more, it's like getting that right and getting the experience quality to be consistent, because, that's been a real challenge when you're delivering care, which is to deliver consistent, high quality experiences across time zones, across locations. And it was always a kind of constraint on the model when we were doing that with humans. And so it's been great to really explode that scale over the last kind of 18 months with a partnership with Lorikeet and then also just kind of a real scale in the category generally. So I think we've kind of tripled the business in the last 18 months, which has been really exciting.
Wow. Yeah, that's cool. And, I imagine you have different regulations for all those markets that you're operating in, right?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, luckily, the digital health world is kind of uniquely split between America and the rest of the world, and the rest of the world kind of more like each other than it is like America. But still, the nuances of communicating with a Japanese patient are very, very different to a Canadian patient and very different again to a German patient. So lots and lots of complexity, and solving that complexity has really been like the heart of the business model.
Okay, cool. Well, we're going to delve into all of that a little bit more as we go through this discussion. But Steve, why don't you jump in and tell us a little bit about yourself and company too?
So the history of Lorikeet is quite tied in with Eucalyptus, but I met Tim shortly after he started the business, and then maybe a year or two into his journey, started working with the Eucalyptus team as sort of an advisor on product questions. And so after I'd spent some time at Stripe and at a climate unicorn called Watershed, I was looking to start my own thing and was very interested in how new large language models were going to work with operations teams. And so I said to Tim, hey, can my co-founder Jamie and I just come and sit in your office and prototype things with your team and sort of immerse ourselves in these operations problems? And Tim was kind enough to say yes. And so, Lorikeet's first office effectively was actually just sitting with the patient support team at Eucalyptus and prototyping with them day in, day out. The thing that we noticed really quickly was all of the support solutions coming to market a couple of years ago were fundamentally based on just summarizing FAQ material. And we watched the Eucalyptus patient support team working, and 0% of their day was spent summarizing FAQ material. Their day was being spent orchestrating quite complicated workflows to solve quite complicated customer problems with some really severe constraints involved. And so we said, cool, let's build that. That's an underserved segment of the market. The problem is generalizable. We thought sort of philosophically and culturally that if we could solve the hardest problem, then we would have the option to go later and solve the easier problems. And that's really the nucleus of what we've done in Lorikeet. And I think it's what's driven a lot of differentiation for us, that we've always run towards doing the hardest thing and taking on the big challenge of what the models can do instead of sort of trying to pick low-hanging fruit. And from that kind of platform with Eucalyptus, we've scaled. To give an example of the sort of level of, I guess, like either craziness or ambition, in Australia, it is illegal to say the name of a prescription medication that you have not prescribed to someone. So if someone emails one of the Eucalyptus brands and says, do you have Ozempic? If you reply and say, yes, we have Ozempic, you've committed a crime. And so we had to be able to, from the day one in 2024, launch an AI agent that would not commit that crime. So that's the sort of bar that we were holding ourselves to. And the partnership with Eucalyptus was critical, both in terms of being willing to take that risk, but also being willing to partner to make sure that we're both confident enough to deploy the AI agent with those sorts of guardrails.
Yeah. And just to be clear for folks who are listening or watching, when you say create an AI agent that would not commit that crime, we're talking about a fully automated agent that would be
no human in the loop.
Yeah. Okay. No human in the loop. That is a pretty big deal to be doing that sort of thing. And it's so interesting when you talked about sitting with team at Eucalyptus and observing those things. There's another company that has a whole model, and it's not an AI company, but one of the software companies that's been around for a while. They had a model they call "Follow Me Home," and it makes me think of that model where sometimes when people build a solution, the way that people actually use that solution is quite different than how they intended or expected it would be used. And in your case, it's in some ways better because you kind of did the follow me thing home at the outset. So you would already know how these solutions were being used. But I think we've kind of like jumped into some of the questions I was going to ask, because I think you've kind of already given people a little bit of familiarity with the business, as both yours and both Lorikeet and Eucalyptus. Unless you want to add a few things, one of the questions I was going to ask is like, Steve, when you and Jamie started building out Lorikeet, like you mentioned a little bit about this, but what kind of white space were you trying to fill when you first jumped in?
So, this kind of customer support or customer facing AI category is incredibly crowded. And a couple of years ago, when we were entering the market, it was also incredibly crowded. Now, it was largely crowded with companies that have since gone out of business. So, there's high turnover, but it's always been very crowded. The thing that made us feel like we had a right to play was really this insight that the solutions coming to market were very focused on picking low-hanging fruit. And there was enormous value to be created if you could do things that were a notch more complicated. And so we've seen that DNA follow through even today, that some of our competitors' go-to-market is very much focused on, let's do the simple stuff first. And we really like to go to customers and say, what do you believe AI can't do? Let's show you that it can do it and then go from there. The reason being, I think that often the rate limiter is not the technology, it's ambition. And so if you have someone who says, look, I just want AI to summarize what's on my help center, I sort of try and challenge customers and say, well, is that a good experience for your users? Like when your user comes and asks you a question, are they expecting to just get a summary back of how to solve the problem themselves? Or are they expecting you to help them actually solve the problem? Like, let's build a system that's able to actually help solve the problem. So, a classic example of that, our second ever deployment, the first use case we put live was canceling and replacing lost and stolen debit cards. So full updating addresses in the database, shipping out new cards, deciding whether to ship cards or not, which has kind of cost implications. And again, we felt if we could prove that could be done reliably, proving that we can handle the simple stuff is a lot easier.
So, and again, is that being done with fully automated AI?
That's right. Yeah, no human in the loop. And certainly in 2024, we lost deals because people came and said, I want an AI co-pilot. And I tried to be as empathetic as possible and feel like I understand why that's what you're looking for. But I think the place this market is going really quickly is that the AI can do it just as well as people without needing a human in the loop. And we're unapologetically focused on that. And if you really want a co-pilot, we're not the right vendor. And we lost those deals. But I think it's proven to be clearly the case that no human in the loop is a good answer in a vast majority of cases. And so we've been very focused on that.
Okay, cool. So what have you two learned together, right? Lorikeet and Eucalyptus, in the work that you've done together that kind of shaped how Lorikeet has evolved? I'm curious to hear part of that story.
Maybe I can jump in there. I think what's really interesting to me is I think this idea, like in complex and regulated industries where you have high level of like what I would call kind of customer stress, in the sense that like, where is my medication? How do I deal with this problem? And then also high levels of regulation. There's actually a very fine line between those two worlds. And so there are very simple solutions which deal with the regulation side and are very low empathy. And then there are very simple solutions that deal with the empathy side, but often at risk of regulation. And so this fine line to be walked between delivering at speed, which patients expect. And in fact, that's where most of the empathy comes from, is being able to like deliver at speed, and then being able to walk the regulatory line with the controls and the deterministic parts around the model to ensure that you aren't crossing lines, is actually quite a lot of work and quite a lot of evolution. And once you get through that, I guess like difficult kind of initial period, and I think this has kind of evolved differently for the product over the last couple of years, but once we got through that in the first year, then the rate at which we could fully automate tickets just increased rapidly. And so we went from being like, and we've trialed some other solutions in the space as well, and it went from being kind of like a 5 to 10% ticket resolution number to kind of the 60 to 70% numbers that we kind of have seen recently. And I think, but it really comes from being able to find that combination of empathy and then structure. And I think that's where Lorikeet's been relatively unique for us, and certainly like been a huge accelerant to our business, to the point where, we're now thinking much more about, well, could we do onboarding? Could we do retention? What is the end? Because like customer support kind of has a strange, but I guess like historical limitation to it, which is like while patients are in the experience, and then you kind of have marketing on both sides from there. Whereas now that we have this like very fast, very high quality response system, the question then is like, well, why limit that to any point? Why have the marketing side? Why not have customer support in this like high empathy, high speed model deliver everything? And so that's kind of how we're thinking about the future.
Okay. So, and I want to go back to something that you said a little bit earlier in your response, and that was, you were using this for maybe 5 to 10% of tickets, but now you're up to like 70% or something like that.
Steve will have more up-to-date numbers than me, so maybe he's better positioned to answer.
Yeah, that's basically right. And I just add, like, the critical thing is actually that it doesn't try to answer that 20 to 30% where it shouldn't or can't. So, in addition to answering questions, we use Lorikeet at Eucalyptus to triage a lot. So previously, for instance, they relied on keyword matching to escalate severe side effects. So if someone wrote, I have heart palpitations, and they misspelled the word palpitation, it wouldn't go into the priority queue. Now we read the messages and identify from the underlying meaning when there's an urgent medical issue and put that straight in front of a registered practitioner, right away. And so the kind of answering is just as, or the not answering is just as important as the answering. We saw, I think, a 10 percentage point increase in Eucalyptus's aggregate CSAT scores by just using AI to put the most complex tickets in front of the best and most qualified human agents, as well as using AI to then quickly answer the rest. So when we say we're very focused on AI being able to answer the humans directly, we are, but it's also critical that for the stuff that can't be handled by AI, you use AI to get the right humans involved.
Cool. I'm listening to this and I'm thinking how big a deal this really is, because we're talking about healthcare here. One of those kinds of things that is really, let me put it this way, the implications of getting it wrong can be a super big deal, right? And you guys have gotten to the place where you're comfortable that you're getting it right, and you're getting it right at scale. And I think that is a really big deal. So, Steve, Tim has given us, some of the kinds of things he's thinking about in terms of, learnings that you guys have learned together, working together. What about from your end?
Yeah.
What have you guys learned that has really helped to shape how Lorikeet works today?
I think just two things incrementally to what Tim said. I mean, one is in any scale deployment, we're handling kind of 7 figures of customer contacts on a run rate basis. The nitty gritty integration with operational systems is, at least half, if not 80% of the work. So it's very easy in AI deployments to talk about the fun, cool technology, but actually like getting integrated into the internal systems, integrating with the systems of record, it's just real hard work. We have forward deployed engineers embedded with Eucalyptus, both in London and in Sydney. Our offices are near each other in both cities. And so that's just a big part of making it work. The second thing I'd say is it's taught us a lot about what it is that end consumers fundamentally want. I think it would be easy to assume that in a healthcare context, people really want to speak to a person. The reality is people really want to be heard and to have their questions actioned quickly. And so the ability of AI to understand and empathize and then to respond very quickly often produces sort of a superhuman experience, especially relative to, say, an overwhelmed human operator. We've actually commissioned some research that we'll be releasing shortly, but if I leak one element of it, we surveyed consumers across Europe and the US about their attitudes to AI and support. And one interesting finding was that consumers are 50% more likely to prefer AI support for questions that they consider personal or embarrassing. So there's actually an extent in a healthcare context, if you're reaching out about, say, erectile dysfunction treatment or obesity, being able to talk to something that can understand you and help you, but isn't another person, can actually be attractive relative to talking to a person.
That's a really interesting point, and one of those special nuances there. You all have been involved in co-creation in a manner of speaking. And I'm curious, like, if you think about other customers that you have worked with, are there any big lessons learned or takeaways that have also helped to inform how platform is evolving and how it works today?
I think we learn from almost all of our customers. One of the things we like about Lorikeet is while we work with some really scaled enterprises, we also work with startups at sort of a Series A scale. And I like that from a business perspective because we get to learn from people at different stages of the journey and sort of apply learnings from one to the other. I'd say one thing we've seen, with Eucalyptus and others is that analytics at scale becomes increasingly important. So understanding why your customers contact you and how that changes has been very important. We saw when we were embedded with the Eucalyptus operations team that they would often know about problems sometimes before the engineering team because they'd start seeing a spike in support requests. And so we turned that then into a product that they could use to identify and communicate about those. So we've had a lot of learning and a lot of different needs. But I think the most interesting thing for us has actually been how similar the needs are of lots of different types of regulated businesses. So actually, a telehealth business is much more similar to a bank than you would maybe think because they're both high stress, high stakes, and high guardrails.
Interesting. Now, what are some of the kinds of metrics that you guys focus on in terms of thinking, measuring success, right? I mean, like, Tim, what kinds of metrics are you all paying into that make you know that, hey, this is successful, this joint work that we're doing?
I mean, the metrics that we care about most are customer satisfaction metrics first and foremost, right? So CSAT scores, I think we've seen reasonably consistent uplift and a kind of continual march as Lorikeet has gotten more and more integrated into the business. I think actually that was probably one thing I was surprised by. I think you kind of think you're going to hit natural limits on that type of stuff, but more integration yields more returns over each kind of increasing quarter. So that's been great. And then I think like you're looking then at kind of response times and cost. And so I think there's this kind of truism on the internet is that the story of the internet is the removal of friction. And I think Lorikeet for us has been a really powerful example of if you remove friction, patients will interact with you more and do more. And so you have a richer, faster experience, and the combination of those two things just has a significantly better outcome for the patients from how they experience the product perspective. And so then you go, well, can we deliver that and how cheaply can we deliver that? And so then we've seen incredible cost improvements to the point where I think we've 4x the business in the time we've been working with Lorikeet and haven't increased the total support costs at all from a human perspective. So pretty remarkable in that. Yeah, it's been remarkable. And so I think that's been huge. And I actually honestly think we're like kind of just scratching the surface with what's possible. Like I think I want to do a lot more because I think there's a lot of value creation for patients that we haven't yet hit on where the constraints of normal support are like kind of, I think Steve said something to me early in working together, which was that one of the impacts that he thinks that the LLMs are going to have on technology companies is shipping less product with the LLMs as actually covering the gaps and having a more dynamic approach to what the experiences actually are. And I think that's been very true for us and will continue to be more and more true as we integrate more deeply.
Well, it's so interesting because we have all these reports out there, how people are not getting ROI from their AI investments. Seems like you've gotten more than your fair share.
Yeah, I think I think Steve spoke about ambition at the start of this call. And I think ROI is directly tied to ambition, right? If you go after hard use cases, you will see results. If you are timid with your approach, you'll see tepid results. And I think like that's true of most things in startup building. So I'm not surprised to have seen it play out here in that way.
Wow, I think that's very cool. So, out in the marketplace, another thing that we hear a lot of talk about is agentic AI. But now the question is, we don't see very much agentic AI. But it sounds like what we're talking about here is agentic AI because these agents are handling these complex workflows without human in the loop end to end. So, I mean, like, am I understanding that right? You guys talk to me about that a little bit.
Yeah. I mean, I think the sort of paradox is there is not a trade-off between, quality or reliability and agenticness. Actually, if you turn up the agentic knob, you actually are also turning up the quality knob, and you still have plenty of options for sort of reliability and safety. That's especially true as the underlying large language models have got smarter. And so, we've definitely seen in some kind of financial services or healthcare players we speak to this real anxiety about, well, can we script exactly what it's going to say? Can we write out all the intents and then write out all the answers, which is the sort of old school natural language processing chatbot approach. And, we invest the time in saying to people like, that seems like it will be better because it seems like you can know exactly what it's going to say in every scenario. But the problem is your customers will always speak differently to what you expect. And the pre-canned responses will always not quite hit the mark because of those differences in context. So you've actually just got to be willing to let go. Yeah. And often it's crappy. Yeah, exactly. And so as Tim said, instead, it's like, okay, let's have the ambition to try and do something that's great for our customers. And then let's figure out what are the features we need to build and the guardrails we need to put in place to make sure that's reliable. And we can go into detail, but that's something we spend a lot of time on at Lorikeet is both how do we make the agent as good as possible, but then how do we have a really kind of sophisticated set of guardrails to make sure the agent kind of stays on track. And that could be, as soon as something bad happens, get the conversation to a human right away. But it's often instead looking at what the agent is about to say and be able to ask it to regenerate if it's gone down the wrong track or done something like that. And so you need this sort of defense in depth approach to make sure it's reliable. But the underlying insight is agentic is higher quality and higher reliability. You just have to be willing to take the leap.
So I got to ask you all, have you not had any kinds of issues with hallucinations?
I mean, there's been issues. Probably my favorite example, Mavu, and it's a good example of guardrails. In 2024, there was a bug with OpenAI that was leading them to missample tokens. So all large language model outputs are tokens. The way that works is they have a token sampler that chooses the next token, given all the tokens that have come so far. And the token sampler was hitting the verb put for some reason, and it was hitting the name of one of Eucalyptus's brands, Juniper, and producing really unusual next tokens. And so the verb put was getting changed into all these made up words. And the sign off, the Juniper team was getting changed into, in one case, the jumper gear. I think in another case, it said the Juniper lingerie. And this happened on a very, very small number of interactions, but it was clearly bizarre. And so, that's a classic lesson of, in a moment like that, you have two choices. One is you wind back the ambition and you say, we just can't trust this. We want to go back to only scripted responses. The other is you say, what guardrails do we need to build to make sure that when that unusual behavior happens from OpenAI, it doesn't flow through and ruin the customer experience? And I remember it would have been a June long weekend in 2024. I was there on a Friday night on a vacation with my family, like writing the code to put a guardrail in place that checked for typos because, misspellings was basically the biggest indication of this. Checked every message for misspellings. If there was a misspelling, we regenerated, and the regeneration basically reduced the problem by 99.9% and made it go away. But I think that was a key moment on both sides where we didn't turn down the ambition, but Eucalyptus also didn't turn down the ambition. And so we put a solution in place and kept going rather than sort of giving up or winding back.
Yeah, Tim, it seemed like you wanted to jump in and say something on that topic too when I first asked about
I was thinking about a more meta point, and I don't have the great examples, unfortunately. But I was just thinking about like the difficulty in rolling to new teams and then new groups of staff members as you scale globally, and some of them who've come from working in environments with different tooling. And so we have support teams in multiple countries, and some of those support teams have come from other businesses or even other kind of support platforms. And so doing the education piece to understand a new set of tools and not defaulting back to path dependency in the ones they know. So really pushing the team to understand that like, hey, we have to push to the cutting edge here because this market is moving really quickly. So using Zendesk AI or whatever the alternative is not going to be satisfactory for what we actually need to do. And so even though you know your way around that tool, it's worth investing the time and the effort to learn something new because the output can be so much better and so much more powerful. And so I've actually found that to be like quite a challenging part of the integration, but one that once people have kind of done the time to learn has been extremely worthwhile for both our teams and then also for the business.
Yep. So it's interesting. How do you all see this evolving, right? I mean, like if you were building a support organization, that was you're going to turn the lights on in 3 years from now, right? You're going to light it up 3 years from now. Given what you know from the work that you've been doing with this platform, like how would you build it? How would you build that differently than than how support organizations have been built in the past.
I mean, Steve will have a much better answer in terms of actually having thought about this deeply, but my actual first and kind of strongest instinct here is the most important thing to do is kind of get started with a partner who is willing to integrate deeply, because basically I have no idea. Like my answer to this question is I have no idea about how support teams are going to be set up in multiple years' time. And honestly, I have no idea where the AI landscape is going to go either, because it's just not, I spend my time thinking about how to manage patients, not the future of LLMs. And so the bet we made... Yeah, hopefully.
A good thing that they'll make that possible for you.
Yeah, hopefully. So the thing that we did, and the thing that I really think was one of the few calls that we've got really right, was kind of invest early, embed deeply, and then kind of trust that relationship to evolve and hold the supplier to a very high standard. And then trust that they will kind of think through the problems with you. And I think that's actually been a real value proposition that we've gotten out of the relationship with Lorikeet is it's been a bit of a learning experience for us, because we just can't keep up with the technology. And so when you ask questions like, what is a support organization going to look like in 3 years? If I was more confident in our abilities, I'd say, well, maybe we end up building these things ourselves. But I think there's naivety to that, because the last 18 months in the evolution show that we would have made 1,000 wrong decisions. And instead, Lorikeet made those 1,000 wrong decisions and fixed them. And so, it's been, it's been in terms of not doing things that don't make your beer taste better. I think this is a really good example of that.
Yeah, well, he let you be great at what you do. Well, I'm going to pass it to you, Steve, so you can give us your thoughts on this.
I mean, I guess if I were building a support team today, let alone in 3 years, I think the biggest insight is I wouldn't build a support team. My fundamental belief is that every interaction a consumer has with your brand or product is your product. In my mind, there is no difference between your app and your support email and your support phone number and your chatbot. It's all just your product. And that's how your customers think about it. Now, we as organizations have thought about it in terms of product and support, because for a long time, we needed organizationally to set ourselves up like that, because support required building these big offshore centers that needed operational expertise, but product was about building technology. Well, it's actually all just one thing. So come at it from a customer lens and say, how do we want to show up for our customers? And the thing that we increasingly see is that your customers basically need two things. One is they want to choose the channel and time. They don't want to be told the channel and time. Mm-hmm. I literally just changed insurers for my home contents insurance because I tried to get my existing insurer to add contents to my policy, and I couldn't do it except by calling their phone center. And I didn't want to do that because I'm busy. So I got AI to go and find me an insurer that I could sign up with online. Then I got AI to sign up online for me. So your customers need to choose the channel. The second is your customers need you to be a proactive advisor to them about how to solve their problems, because if you don't do it, they will go to ChatGPT to do it. So I can't go to my insurer and say, help me figure out what items I need special contents insurance for, because they don't have any way to do that other than calling them. So I got Claude to do it instead, and they got disintermediated and they lost my business. I think every company has to think about that risk. And so the net result is it's all just one product. Make sure it's omnichannel, which means app and phone and chat and SMS. And email, and make sure it actually solves people's problems instead of giving them sort of weak sauce.
Now, I'm going to jump in there just a little bit more. Unfortunately, we're running out of time. So you guys cover all those channels and essentially deliver the same kind of experience across the channels?
That's right. Yeah. I mean, one of the things that has been hard to do, but we've really, I've really insisted with our technology team, is that Lorikeet is natively omnichannel, meaning if you've trained a Lorikeet concierge and deployed it for chat and you want to turn on phone, you just turn on phone. Now, there's actually a lot of subtlety in the difference between a phone conversation and a chat conversation, but that's all handled within Lorikeet. And so as a Lorikeet customer, you focus on the business logic, and then we focus on the adaptation across channels. And the reason for that is just, it's what the end customers want. Like sometimes if you're driving to work, you want to make a phone call. Once you're at work and you're in the open plan cubicle and you're calling about medication, maybe you want to text instead. And so you just as a business have to set yourself up to serve what your end consumers need. And we see Lorikeet as kind of adding a lot of value by making that easy to do.
Okay. So essentially when you deploy with someone, you can, cut across all the channels, and it's just a matter of which ones they want to turn on.
That's right. And very typically you see people sort of expand. They start maybe replacing the existing channel, and then they start saying, well, what can we do with these new channels? And you kind of grow from there.
Well, truth be told, I got lots more questions that I want to ask you, but we don't have a lot of time. So I'm going to ask one more, and then we're going to wrap up. So both of you have built companies that have been highly valued. I mean, Tim, you have
Tim much more so than me.
Well, Tim has signed an agreement to be acquired by Hims and Hers, and but you've got a 9-figure valuation already too, Steve. So I mean, tell me, how you guys been able to accomplish this? Share a little bit about that.
To be honest, I'd mainly throw to Tim because I think actually watching Eucalyptus both as a vendor but also as an advisor has been hugely informative to how I've approached. And I think Eucalyptus is one of the most impressive companies I've ever come across. And so Tim's now got the kind of $1 billion exit, which very, very few entrepreneurs ever get. And so Tim, you should run with this.
Yeah, I mean, it's a broad question, right? Like, how do you distill all of the things that have kind of happened along the way? I think the biggest thing for us is we executed at a very high level when we got lucky. So I think a lot of people talk about the differences between luck and execution. We spent a lot of time kind of getting ready to get lucky. And then a moment happened, which was the rise of the obesity medications. And we went all in and executed extremely well for a 2-year period after that moment. And that was the difference between, I think, being a mediocre company and being a reasonably strong outcome is having the team in place, knowing when to go all in, and then kind of keeping the pedal to the floor at that moment. And so, I think the parallel to Steve's business, he's probably he's probably living in the start of that moment, right at the moment, right at this time. And so I think a lot of businesses I've seen, and certainly many of my generation's founders, thought the moment would last longer than it would, not longer than it did, particularly those who started software businesses and probably didn't get to the scale or durability they needed to kind of get through. And so the lesson that I've taken is moments are kind of fleeting. And when you see one, the execution bar really rises, and it's really important to make sure you hit it. And so there's no room for complacency is probably the takeaway.
Absolutely. I mean, all this stuff has a shelf life. Now, it sounds like having a great support solutions in place also helped you all to execute in that moment.
Oh, for sure. I mean, yeah, not to kind of I think the thing here is when you are trying to scale extremely quickly, you need solutions that can scale with you. And there aren't many, right? Everything breaks all the time. And, Lorikeet broke a number of times, but the speed at which you have a partner that can execute alongside you, and if they're moving at the same pace as you, I think that's the value of startups being customers of startups is you have a cultural alignment that kind of ends up working. And so, yeah, I mean, that's definitely been a big part of the journey.
Hey, moving at the speed of business. Gentlemen, it's been a pleasure speaking with you. Like I said, I got lots more questions that I'd like to ask you, but unfortunately, we have run out of time. So before we go, can you just tell people how to best get a hold of you so that they can connect with you? I'm sure you want them to connect with your businesses. So tell us, Steve.
Yeah, look, I think easiest way is my email is steve@lorikeetcx.ai. Shoot me an email, question, chat, whatever. I'm always happy to talk and learn from people. And I'll let Tim nominate his preferred channel of contact.
It's definitely not email. Please don't email me. It's you can reach me on LinkedIn. Yeah, I'm pretty accessible there. It's just Tim Doyle, Eucalyptus, soon to be Hims and Hers. So let's get me before I move over there.
Cool. Well, again, thank you. It's been a huge pleasure talking with the two of you.
Yeah, likewise.
So to our listeners, thank you for tuning in. You can look at this conversation and say to yourself, I need to be back here for the next one because I'm counting on it being equally as informative, equally as enjoyable as this one today. So join us again for the next episode of Be Customer Led. But for now, that's all, folks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to Be Customer Led with Marbu Brown. We are grateful to our audience for the gift of their time. Be sure to visit us at becustomerled.com for more episodes. Leave us feedback on how we're doing or tell us what you want to hear more about. Until next time, we're out.